talking to someone else and telling them, well, this is what used to happen when I was upset as a little person. And watching that person's face as they find their empathy and their compassion, telling the story to someone else changes the story for us.
Welcome to Permission Slips, a space to practice paying attention to your life with self-compassion so you can experience the wholeness, purpose, and joy you were made for. I'm Jillian DeBritz, a life and leadership coach and a recovering perfectionist, learning alongside you how to give myself permission to be human. I'm so glad you're here with me today for my conversation with today's guest, Mary Van Geffen. Mary, welcome.
So good to be here. I want to be human with you. I'm excited.
Let's do it. I want people to know who you are because you have so much expertise to offer us. And so friends who are listening, Mary Van Geffen is the international parenting coach for moms of Spicy Ones. I cannot wait to talk about our Spicy Ones. She helps people who are highly competent in life but overwhelmed by motherhood to lean into the spiritual discipline of staying calm and cultivating warmth and tenderness, all while trying to wrangle fiery future CEOs. Often this requires serious skill building and the balm of self-compassion. So Mary has a ministry on Instagram where she posts an inspiring parenting tip every single day. And you guys, Mary's Instagram feed is one of my favorites. She is full of wit and humor and authenticity while also offering so much good content. So just reading her social media will help you delight in your child and remember that you are enough. Mary believes that when a mom realizes how hard she is on herself and cracks the door open for some self-compassion, her entire family is bathed in light. She offers online parenting classes and her signature 8-week group program, Moms of Spicy Ones, which starts back up in the fall. And she wants to help moms gain the confidence to choose gentle, respectful parenting, especially if they weren't raised that way. Mary is a certified simplicity parenting counselor and professional co-active coach, but her greatest achievement is cultivating a calm, kind, and firm relationship with her spicy go-getter daughter and mild child son. And an Enneagrammable hubby. That's so funny. We all know the ones that say the Enneagram isn't me. Yeah. So today she's bringing her life coaching and teaching skills to our podcast. Welcome, Mary. I'm so glad you're here.
Me too. And the listeners should know that you are very special to me because you are one of the 6 people who read my parenting book before anybody else did to give me feedback on if it was what it needed to be. And I really appreciated all of your very smart feedback.
Well, it's a gift. It was such a privilege to get to have access to your words as your message is being formed because, Mary, you have such important words of hope and transformation for those of us who, I would say any of us in the parenting journey are on our own spiritual transformation journey if we're willing to allow it to transform us, but especially those of us with Spicy Ones, which I just have to tell you how I discovered you. I was in the midst of a full-on parenting meltdown in my bathroom, door locked, crying. It was one of those moments where my husband was somewhere and both my kids were home and my very spicy one was in a full spicy place. And I was maxed and I'd hit a wall and I was at my wit's end and on the verge of a panic attack, honestly. And I texted my friends and was just like, please pray. I don't think I'm going to make it. I don't know what I'm going to do. And one of my friends said, okay, take some deep breaths and look up Mary Van Geffen. Watch some of her reels, take some breaths. You're going to be okay. And I literally on the floor of my bathroom crying, looked up your Instagram page and started reading and immediately felt seen and soothed and calm. And so I just want to say in the moment, what you're offering, literally, it pulled me back from the edge. So thank you for the content you're creating.
Wow, that's so powerful to hear that story. I do think there are like 2 types of moms that resonate most with what I've got going on. And one is the perfectionist and the pleaser. And I'm doing everything right. So why is this kid acting like this? And why are people judging me? So that you fit perfectly in there. And it cracks me up because I am the opposite. I am a disaster and I'm like good enough. And I'm leaving a trail of used Kleenex behind me. So it's just funny to be in a position of speaking into your life, knowing that you probably have it so much more together than I do, but I am inherently neurodivergent and playful. And so I love having a place on your team. The other type of mom that I think I'm really helpful with is the spicy AF mom who, is maybe more spicier than her kid, but it's sort of blaming her kid for the monster that comes out in her. And so it's just it's an honor. And I feel like people talk about imposter syndrome. I'm getting like a fraudulent complex because my kid was really tough. And I learned through the school of hard knocks, which is how every Spicy One does. Spicy Ones like to learn through they're experiential learners. And so I just thank you. Thank you for letting me speak into your life.
Yeah. Well, and that begs the question for me is, how did you get into this place where you are a mom of a spicy one? You are a spicy one. You've kind of lived your own journey. And how did you get to the place where now you are offering encouragement to moms like me who are on the bathroom floor crying and don't know what to do? Or, the moms that are in your coaching program. Would you talk about your journey a little bit?
Sure. I mean, the reason I'm here now is because I was where many listeners were before, and I came to sort of the end of my my ability. I didn't have within me, it wasn't common sense, this parenting of a strong-willed, intense, emotional child. And so I was reading every book and taking classes, but my results weren't the same. And I began to sort of want to pathologize my daughter and think like, well, there must be something really wrong with her. And so this is when she was 5 and my son was 3. I sort of went on a journey to get her diagnosed. And so I guess the short answer is I got here because I couldn't do it on my own. And so I had to have a whole journey and a bottom and go to therapy and take nonviolent parenting classes. And then eventually I got into simplicity parenting and got certified as a counselor for that, and slowly just added to my skills. Then I became a co-active professional coach. And then I would teach one-on-one once I figured it out, how to get to calm, firm, and kind and sort of not be so rigid with this kid. Then I was able to start teaching it sort of one-on-one. And I did that for about 5 years. And I started seeing you start to see the same themes over and over again when you do something long enough. And I was like, wow, I think I could create videos that explain this. And so then, and I will say I had a client who I happened to be in Seattle, and she's like, oh, can I take you to lunch? And she was like, I have this vision for your business where instead of coaching, you have a signature course. And I was like, really? Like I said, I'm ADHD and recently learned I'm autistic. And so I thought the executive functioning to make that happen just seemed overwhelming to me. And so she really helped me put it together. And now I've been teaching that class for 4 years, twice a year. So 1,700 women have gone through it. So I don't have a degree in child development. I am not a teacher, but I do have a master's in marketing, which really helps on the internet because
yes, it does.
It's funny. Part of it is like, how did I get to a place where I can coach other moms on their child? That's important. But there's also, how did I get a place where I can stand up on the internet and be myself and handle the trolls and the negativity and even the days where, wow, nobody liked that. So it's been interesting to mature as a woman and my self-esteem and just sort of figure out who I am while building a business, while learning to parent. It's been a wild ride. And now I've got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and we're at a good spot.
It's incredible, even just to hear you looking back and talking about your journey, which I'm sure you couldn't have predicted or planned for, the journey that you've taken. I'm sure you wouldn't have said, in X amount of years, I want to be an internet coach of parents. And, I'm going to be creating reels and making people laugh and also giving them helpful tools. But what I'm hearing you say is, I was on this journey and I learned to become myself as a parent. I learned to embrace my God-given strengths and gifts and temperament. And I'm thinking back to what I expected parenting to look like, Mary, as this perfectionist who thought, if I can read all of the books and do everything right, then my kids will not have issues. They will not suffer pain and I will not mess them up. That was an actual belief I had, that somehow I could do it right, whatever that means. And that created so much anxiety as a mom, a new mom especially. And then by the time my son came around a couple years later, I realized that I actually am the expert. No one else knows my kid the way I do. And I started my own journey of trying to discover, not just in my parenting, but as a human being, what are my gifts and strengths? What unique offering do I have for the world that also my kids need? And so I wonder, what would you say to parents who are looking to experts and genuinely need the support that you can offer, but also might be leaning more on outside voices than their own?
Well, I think that that is a part of learning any new skill. I mean, when you're trying to learn to snowboard, you're there with the person and they're saying, no, you got to get on your toes. And you do that for them. I'm making this up. I obviously don't have a snowboard, but I'm a skier. But you do what they tell you to do until you can stand on your own and begin to go, well, that's not comfortable. Like my body wants to be in a crouch. I'm going to try that. Oh, wow. That was a little wonky, but I think if I adjust it, like in other words, I think the learning process is first you copy somebody else, and that's okay. Especially if your parents parented you in a way that you don't want to replicate. So you're making it up. And so it's really good to have some mentors or, and there's two kinds of mentors. There is the kind that you have a relationship with, and whether that relationship is you brought my digital course or you're good friends with Jillian and she gives you advice and they're kind of speaking specifically into your life. But there's another kind of mentor that I have like a little hyperfixation on, and that is like a Patronus from Harry Potter, where it's a symbol or a character that embodies the part of you that's sort of latent and undiscovered and unstrengthened. And so that Patronus could be Claire Huxtable from the Cosby Show, because she was like so measured and chill about defiance. Or it could be Mrs. Honey from Matilda. But having like an archetype or a character in your mind was really helpful to me in the beginning. Mine used to be Glinda the Good Witch from the first Wizard of Oz. It wasn't cute little Ariana. And so I would say, I'm sorry, but it is lunch and I made chicken sausage. I know you don't and it was pretty fake, but it was all I had, because my natural inclination was to be like, you know what? You are so ungrateful. Like that would have been what I would have gone to, because that would have been what my mother would have gone to, right? It would have been a character attack. And so I had to pretend to be somebody else until I figured out the parts that were authentic to me and that I wanted to continue. And I let go of like, I didn't need to be wearing sparkly pink and I didn't need to be sing-songy, but I could stand straight and have some regalness to me, because that is kind of part of how I move my body. And so I guess I just want to say, it's okay to borrow until you decide what you want for your own.
There's some wisdom there, recognizing that when we don't have a model of how we want to parent, that we have to create our own mental template or Patronus. I love that image, to help us envision a new way.
Call it a parenting Patronus. Pick yours, DM me what you chose. Because I like somebody chose Jonathan from Queer Eye. Okay. He's like so loving and sweet. And there's so many, somebody else chose Jane Goodall, who just shows up and is so curious about the apes and everything. And it's usually that quality you don't have. Like maybe you want to be curious about what's going on for your kid, but you slip right into judgment. So kind of isolating that way you want to show up and then picking an inner mentor.
I love that. Well, and one of my favorite things about your message in your book and on the internet, as I've followed you for years now, is you recognize that our parenting isn't just about the things we do with our kids. It's not just about the ways that we respond to them or the ways that we're teaching them or training them. Before we can do anything with our kids that feels authentic to the parents we want to be, we have to do our own inner work first. And so can you talk a little bit about what some of that inner work might be that we might need to consider entering into if we want to be the moms or dads that we're designed to be?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, because people talk about like doing the work. And it's like, well, what is the work? And I guess the big picture is I would worry less about what you do and instead worry about who you be. And so who do you want to be in these moments that are high conflict or emotional or triggering? And the work starts with getting clear on how it was for you to be little, because there's enough research out there that less indicative of whether or not trauma continues or poor coping skills continues into the next generation is not how bad your childhood was. It's whether or not you have a coherent narrative about it. So warning signs are people who say like, oh, they did the best they could, or I was a little terror, I deserved everything I got. That's actually covering up. It's like you haven't done the work yet. Let's put it that way. If the work being coming to terms with what it was like for you to be little and powerless, working through that and showing up for that version of you. You'll hear it called inner child work. Getting clear, telling the stories to someone else doesn't have to be a therapist, but if you got the funds, do it, girl. Find out if your insurance covers it. Why would you not?
Yes.
But talking to someone else and telling them, well, this is what used to happen when I was upset as a little person. And watching that person's face as they find their empathy and their compassion, telling the story to someone else changes the story for us. And some of us are locked in a childish understanding of what happened when we were little. Maybe some of it was when we were pre-verbal, or we just never put words to it, or maybe we were told it was our fault. If we can talk about that and unearth some of that, we like dust away a lot of the grime that is going to block us from being the parent we want to be. And a lot of the unconsciousness where, like, I used to, when my son was, he must have been like 4 or 5, and we would be running late to soccer, and we'd be in the minivan, and he wanted to run right out, but he didn't have his shoes on. And I'd be like, well, hold on, let's put your cleats on. And there's something about trying to get little feet into cleats, and then I'm pulling on him, but he's lifting up his feet, so I'm not getting any purchase. And I remember this rage bubbling up in me as he's looking out at all his buddies on the field. And it was like, it made no sense. There was an anger here that was being directed at my son or myself. So coming to terms with, like, getting curious, like, what is that about? Like, there's a lot of, like, the dispassionate observation of some of those moments when that outsized rage comes, which is never about the present moment. That's always about the past, when you felt powerless, and now there's a part of you saying, I will never do that, allow that again, because I'm big now. What's landing for you there?
So many things. First, even that sense of a dispassionate observation. I talk about gentle curiosity a lot. Like, what would it look like for us to be curious? Because curiosity and judgment can't coexist. So to be able to even step back from our current experience long enough to notice dispassionately, I love that phrase. Well, there's a rage here. There's something happening inside me. And to be able to separate ourselves from it long enough to not take that rage out on our kid while we're trying to put on the soccer cleats, but to take a pause and take a breath. And also this idea of telling our story to someone else changes the story. And I've been doing a ton of work in this area in my own life recently as a part of a couple of different groups that I'm in right now, where we are practicing telling our stories more truly. And the power of telling our stories in the presence of empathetic listeners, Mary, it is changing not just my perception of the story, but literally changing my brain, right? Like, it's rewiring those neural pathways. And a good friend of mine who has really introduced me to this idea of story work told me about Adam Young's new book, who, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think it's called Embrace Your Story. And I've just started reading through it, but he says that until we're able to understand how our past has shaped us, because we know from brain science, right, that our childhoods, everything about our past experience has literally shaped how our brain functions, how we react in the present. So until we're able to make sense of how that story has shaped us, we're living just as much in the past as we are in the present. And so our responses to our kids are shaped by the responses we were trained to experience as kiddos, for better or worse, with parents that were doing the best they could, yes, but imperfect, just like we are. And so I love that you're making space to be curious about how our past experiences are impacting not just our present life, but our present parenting with our own little people.
Yes. And sometimes I think week 3 of my Mom's a Spicy One, I will ask folks to find a childhood photo of themselves at the same age as their child. And they tend to be, between 2 and 10 or whatever, and put that somewhere and do some work to come up with adjectives to describe that child. And if the thoughts that immediately come are like a pain in the butt or needy or bossy, then that's a real red flag that it's time to do some, like, just to pour compassion all over that child and to notice what is adorable about her, and to find her, to locate her in your body. That's other inner child work, is like, when I think about this little person, like I used to love to climb up in this magnolia tree, and I would go pretty high above the garage, and then I would play drums on and I just would sit up there enjoying it. And I think about that little girl who just likes to vibe and be in nature. And how do I take care of her now? Because she's still in my cell. She's still witnessing how I treat myself and how I think about her. And so we can be a lot kinder to the child in front of us when we take time to be kind to that child inside of us. And what does that look like? It might be putting a hand on your heart and your belly and saying, how you doing? You okay? Which is very different than the other day. I caught myself. I just moved to a new house and it has two stories. It's so exciting because I'm going to have the strongest glutes on the planet. But I'm constantly going up and down the stairs. Oh, forgot this. Oh, and the other day I came upstairs, couldn't remember what I would come up for. So I started going downstairs and I heard this thought just flit across my consciousness. And it was, I hate myself. Why do I forget this thing? And I was like, I literally stopped on the stairs. I was like, whoa, that is not true. I don't hate myself. I love myself. And it was just old programming, like an echo of something. But if you think about that phrase, that's really harsh to say, I hate myself. And, you hear it, but it's like, don't talk to yourself in a way that you wouldn't speak to a friend, because the connection is you can't be like, oh, I hate myself. I'm such an idiot. Hi, sweetie, welcome home from school. You can't make that transition. There's going to be a part of you that is bitter and feels abused and put upon and a martyr. And then you're going to operate out of that towards your child. And that's not pretty. Martyrs don't make good mothers.
Ooh, that should be like a t-shirt. Martyrs don't make good mothers, right? We can't sacrifice ourselves on the altar of motherhood and expect our kids to come out better for it. We as mothers, as parents, have got to honor our own journeys as we help our kids navigate theirs. So as you're talking about that thought that flitted across your mind and how quickly that happened and your ability to even notice it and to pause and say, oh, wait, where did that come from? It makes me think about how often thoughts come into our mind that we don't even notice, that we just assume are true because our narrative, the story that is so deeply woven into our neural pathways, is one of shame and self-hatred and self-condemnation for lots of different reasons, right? Maybe that's the story that we were told. Maybe that's how we learn to survive and move through the world. But it takes so much work, like effort, to pay attention to our own inner world, our own thoughts, enough to say, wait, that's not true. I'm going to choose a different narrative.
Yes. And I want to say it gets a lot easier, like any skill. So it does at the beginning. It's like, oh my gosh, I got to slow down to speed up. Like when you start working on this stuff, your customer service levels will decline. You will not be as attentive a mom or as like checking all the boxes, because you'll be slowing down to check in with your own body and your own self and to be kind to yourself. But then it starts to become, I used to, when my kids were 5, 6, 7, I was doing most of the day with a clenched stomach. And I remember the day I was like, okay, there was like several kids over and I felt like I was on beat the clock or something. And then I was like, why does my body feel like I'm poised for a marathon and being chased by a bear? There's nothing here that's danger. And so I just took a moment to like unclench my belly, soften my shoulders, check in with my heart and breathe out. And then I was like a different mother. There's a very different vibe. And this is, parenting is leadership. So we got to really make sure that the leader is not clenched, anxious, angry. We got to attend to the leader so that you're creating a culture that's more likely to get cooperation and connection.
Ooh, I love that reframe, because it's easy, on my worst parenting days, it's easy for me to resent my kids for the tone that they're setting in our house, as if they're leading me. And so that reframe to remind myself that I am the leader. My husband and I together, we are leading our family. We get to decide what kind of culture we want to create. That's empowering. And it also feels like calling me up to that sense of responsibility that I've been given by God to lead these people, these humans whom I love. And it draws me back to what you said earlier about our thought life and the ways we think about ourselves. Something that you talk about a lot that has shifted and given me such a practical tool to practice in my own mind is the way we think about our kids impacts how we feel about them and how we treat them. So can you talk a little bit about our thoughts toward our kids and about them?
Yes, that's so funny. This morning I was writing 30 affirmations for the spicy one, because when we didn't define what a spicy one is, right? Jillian, it can be a child who's just strong-willed and intense and has a hard time regulating. It's like the 20%, They're more highly sensitive. They're slow to warm up to a new, they're inflexible. They're the loudest person in the room. They negotiate with adults. It's just sort of this intense kid. It can also be a kid that is neurodivergent in some way. And I think that it's really easy with, especially like there's research that shows that ADHD kids by like the age of 12 have received so much negative feedback because they're into everything. So it's like, no, stop. No, why'd you do that? No. So they're getting so much negativity. We are the only ones in this child's life who are appointed, designated, empowered to delight in them. And we are the ones that are having the most impact on their self-esteem. It's not their sibling, it's not their teacher, it is us. So we have a duty to take captive these hopeless thoughts of like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be a serial killer. And we do it kind of jokingly, but we really need to lean heavily on words of affirmation that start inside. And so that might mean taking a note in your phone that is just positive things, because that which you look for, you find. There's a part in our brain, I think it's called the reticulating activation system. It's RAS, the RAS system. And it's the reason that when you decide, I think I'm going to buy a red car, suddenly every car you see is red. And it's because your brain is an algorithm on some level, and it's getting so much input every day that if you make a declaration or a decision, it helps you find more of that. It's sort of like scientific manifestation in a way, right? So if you decide, I want to be a big fan of this kid and I want to focus on what's great and what's developing and their highest self, that translates into how they see themselves. And a child that thinks you're on their team and you like them is much more likely to take the risk, to try the hard thing, to be kind, to make those steps. And I have just a few affirmations here that are on the side of them. I just want to read them. Saying things like, your ideas change the world around you in powerful ways, because these spicy ones are the innovators and they are the world changers. And saying, the questions you ask make people think differently. I appreciate those questions. Or, hey kid, you learn by doing, and that makes your knowledge truly yours. It's basically taking these things that are like, oh my gosh, this kid won't listen. I've already done this thing. Can't they just hear me out? I actually have some authority here and some experience, but no, not this kid. Instead of focusing on that, flip it. It's the same way there was a great push to not call girls bossy, but instead to call them decisive or leaders. And I think we have to really just take these negative phrases and realize that everything negative about your larger than life kid is what's going to make them amazing as an adult. And so flip it and start keeping a list and start looking for the beauty and the positive, because there's so much research that shows that positive reinforcement and setting expectations ahead of time and then naming how they did it, where they came in good enough, has so much more impact than punishment and threats and all that stuff.
There's so much truth in this. The way we think about our kids is the way we're going to speak about our kids to them. And the way we think about our kids and speak to them is how they're going to think about themselves. We are shaping their sense of identity by the words we speak or don't speak.
We are shaping their inner voice. If we say things like, you're such an 80% kid, you never finish the last part, their subconscious is like, duly noted, I never finish what I start. And then they begin to say that to themselves. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I was so annoyed because I have a very high trending video right now that is basically starts with, you speak to a king and a king appears. When you speak beautiful words of what is great about your kid, you get more of that. People want to lean into that. That is like leadership 101. And some joker came in there, and here's the thing, you always remember the one negative. There's so much positivity on this post, but I won't forget this guy who's like, only God can manifest with his words. Wrong, incorrect. And I was like, no, that is how we are made in the image of God. That is part of our birthright, is that I don't want to get literal, but like Adam was asked to name all the animals. And there's something in our words, we have to really know how sacred they are, and what we say comes to pass with our children until they're about 14 and they don't want to hear anything yet.
That gave me goosebumps down my arms, that the words that we speak become our children's identity, which both feels terrifying and empowering. I was with a group of women last night. I have my own coaching groups that I run. And this group of women, we're calling it the intentional life. And we're talking about how to live intentionally in our one and only beautiful life that we've been given. And one of the exercises we were doing was talking about our unique superpowers. What is the superpower that we bring to the world? And that is the hardest question for women I work with to answer. For women to own their own beauty and strength and to be able to name it and speak it aloud, it was so uncomfortable for them. And so we had this whole conversation about the fact that we don't have a lot of practice naming our own strengths. And that makes it hard to name for other people too. And at the same time, if we can practice naming the strengths we see in our kids or even in our spouse or in our friends, it builds our vocabulary.
About that, I'm writing these affirmations this morning, and my husband has just come back from a 8-day van trip. He's trying to get us into van life. And as I'm writing them, I tend to have this inner voice that's like, you're telling other people to do this. Are you doing it, lady? And it's keeping me authenticity is so important to me. So I was like, here's my man in the kitchen with me. So I looked up and I said, babe, you are so powerful. When you set a vision, you make it happen. And he did what all spicy ones do. He said, like what? Because your spicy one wants specific details so they know you're not reading some script to them. And I said, well, you decided you wanted to try van life and you went out and found a car and you had it retrofitted how you wanted it. And then you outfitted it with all the stuff. And then you chose a itinerary that people would die for and you did it all by yourself. And I watched him puff up like his chest began to point to the sun and he smiled. And I was like, I need to do this more often. I'm just doing it right now because I'm trying to prove to myself that I do the thing I'm telling others to do. But I hadn't done this for this man in a long time. And I really loved seeing, he didn't say like, oh, thank you for affirming me. I didn't get any of that, but I watched his body language change and the corners of his mouth go up. And the same thing happens to our child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And don't we want to practice being people who speak life and belief into others? I mean, let's just practice on our kids.
Well, and also it's not their job to do it back. A lot of times, especially pleasers or folks who have an inner critic that's kind of a pleaser, think things should be transactional or equal. And so you speak this life in your kid and they stare at you blankly and they're like, can we go now? And you're like, oh, I didn't get a thank you. I didn't get anything. And then I'm also not being told I'm a great mom. That doesn't come for a lot of these kids until they have their own baby. And they're like, wow, I get it now. So let's put to rest the idea that your kid is going to give back what you're giving. This kid didn't ask to be born. You brought this kid in or you adopted this kid. And now this is a sacrificial relationship. I don't ever want somebody to sacrifice themselves to the point of depletion or not wellness, but I do want you to give lovingly without an expectation of getting back.
Which is so hard, Mary. I'm thinking about how often I find myself resentful because I'm giving and giving and giving and feel unseen or unappreciated. And it requires a lot of groundedness and self-affirmation in those moments to not lash out or say things that I don't mean because I do want to be appreciated.
Almost like a contortionist who knows that she can get her shoulders, a half foot away from her waist if she goes backwards, but then she keeps going beyond what she can do. And then she's mad at the audience. And so I do want to say, like, it's up to us to say, I brought him lunch and now he's telling me he really wanted, a cran apple juice. And I guess I can get up from watching the game and go or I can say, I hear that. I don't have one. I know that's a very specific example, but I feel like sometimes you go all out for your child and then they ask for that one other thing you didn't do. And then you tell yourself they're never happy. So instead, you have to know where your own boundary is. And then you have to lovingly say, mom's all done. I'm taking a break now, actually. I'm closed for business. So that you don't get to that resentful place. And then the other part is telling yourself like, way to go. Can't believe you pulled all this together. Regardless of whether or not they realize the effort this took, I am really impressed with you. And if you're just listening to this, I've got my hand on my heart and my hand on my belly. And I'm just taking a moment to say, good job, little girl. You did wonderful. And that feels really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It almost sounds a little woo-woo, right? Like, let me just affirm myself, but it's true. It's true. It's like neurobiologically that touch and that compassion offered to ourselves, it matters. And so I hear you saying again, let's pay attention to our own inner boundaries and our own inner capacity and recognize when I'm maxed out, I don't need to keep giving. I'm responsible for managing my own capacity so that my kids don't have to be responsible for my emotions or my response. That's not their job. It's my job to be responsible.
And I want to dig into the woo-woo because that needs to be a t-shirt too, dig into the woo-woo. But like if we've all had different kinds of girlfriends, and the girlfriend who is mean to herself is kind of a dangerous friend. The one who's like, oh, I look so gross today. Or, oh, I don't know what I was thinking. That's so stupid. Like they're kind of draining and they tend to get offended easily. Like to me, that's not a super safe person to be in relationship with. But the person who is so kind to herself, who's like, yeah, I wasn't able to do it. I'm human. That person is so luxurious to be around because when they're kind to themselves, you know that there's not going to be these like trap doors that you fall into. They can be kind to you. There's no hidden agenda. So I think it's like there's something about self-compassion that makes a person safer.
There's something about self-compassion that makes a person safer for kids and for adults, right? Mary, this conversation is so rich and I could talk to you for the rest of the day and not have enough. But I'm thinking about the people who are listening and wondering, is there any sort of permission slip that you might want to give to the moms or even the dads who are listening to this conversation?
Yes, I want to give you permission to be your own kind of mom or dad. And if your neighbor is like a great nature hike person and knows how to bring like French bread and brie and turkey on and just finds the best, but that's not you, it's okay. If you're not into crafts and painting inside the house and that drives you crazy, that's okay. There's something like you were kind of saying about your superpower. Maybe you're a reader and you just like cozy. And so your children are just bathed in you reading aloud to them, or you're hooking them up with the best books and making a cute little nook. Or maybe you're a cook and you're teaching your kid all about the sensations of taste. Or maybe you're like a sports mom and that's your thing, but you don't have to be all the things. So find what lights you up, and your kids are better off for it, that you're introducing them to that and that you're happy versus you're in that martyred space where you're trying to do the things you think good moms do. I had a client who was an adventurous person and then she had 3 kids in 4 years and she just felt like she was a prisoner in her home. But she knew that a good mom is supposed to have like all meals are supposed to be served at home and they're at a set time. And so, but it was killing her. And I was like, well, what would you do if that wasn't what a good mom was? She's like, I'd throw them all in the car and go to the beach and get McDonald's on the way home. And I was like, that is your homework. I want you to do. And she was glorious the next week. Like we did it. It was fun. And that's what she needed to feel like her parenting was a fulfilling life for her. And so be who you are unabashedly. Write down what it means to be a good mom. And I want that to be like less than 2 sentences. And then give yourself a break if you don't do all the rest. Like your job description can't be 2 pages long, and it can't be this nebulous thing in your brain that you never quite reach because the goalposts keep moving. So define what it means to be a good mom for you, and then throw out the rest.
I love that freedom to be the mom that you want to be, not what everyone else thinks you should be or the internet tells you should be, but to define for yourself what good means. Because there isn't a black and white answer. There's not a formula to be a good mom.
There's no way to be a perfect mom and 1,000 ways to be a good enough mom.
So beautiful. Mary, this has been such a life-giving and freeing conversation. Thanks for being here with me.
I had a blast.
Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Permission Slips. I hope that you've been inspired to pay attention to what's happening inside of you in your moments of interaction with your little spicy ones. And I also hope that you're giving yourself permission to be curious and to offer yourself the compassion that you've always needed. Remember, your life matters, and so does your self-compassion, more than you know.